Produced over a mile above sea level. You can't get much higher than that.
The John Doe Radio Show.
Low seeds.
Welcome to the John Doe Radio Show. I am your host, John Doe. I hope you're doing fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us this week. We have news coverage and analysis. Quite a bit of analysis. It's a little ranty, I must warn you. About Halloween candy, that's a big story this time of year. California legalization updates, that's going to be big for us here on the JDR until, well, California gets it right. And hopefully they do get it right. We're going to talk about weed and sex. It's an interesting story that came out this past week linking more sex to the amount of weed that you smoke. So I'm a little bit critical of it too. So we get into it. We talk about potency and the breakdown of the fallacy that the weed today is not your father's weed in the sense that it's the amount, percentage that was given to you, that was told to you, that it was 50, 60, 70, 100 times stronger than your father's weed. That's just kind of ridiculous. That where the numbers came from, for those numbers, came from ditch weed. We also talk about Attorney General Jeff Sessions and give you an update on possible federal crackdowns and more on this week's John Doe Radio Show.
It's the John Doe Radio Show. How much higher can you get?
I'm out here trying to make it. Woman, can't you see? Takes a lot of money to make it. Let's talk truthfully.
I gotta say, it felt a little bit more like I was riding the horse again this week rather than last week. Last week felt a little bit dry, but we get back into the swing of things a little bit more with this week with a lot of opinion, a lot of analysis. Also, if you would like to help the John Doe Radio Show present itself to the public and would like to be a sponsor, presenting sponsor of the John Doe Radio Show, email me, johndoeradio@gmail.com. We would love to have you on board, and we would love to help get the word out about you too. We didn't do a lot of advertising before in the sense of Facebook ads or other things like that, but that's something that we definitely want to do this time around. I would like to get a Facebook ad going very soon, and those are the type of things that we would like to help have presenting sponsors. Things like our monthly Libsyn bill that hosts our website and all that good stuff. So I think we picked some pretty good places to jump off from, and I think we've got a fantastic start. I'm excited to get this going again. I hope you're excited. I'm very stoked. It's been 10 years, ladies and gentlemen. 10 years since we started the John Doe Radio Show. If that doesn't excite you, well, you're not Tim Martin. Let's get to it.
It's the John Doe Radio Show.
It being Halloween week, if you pay attention to the media almost anywhere, especially in states where cannabis is legal, there's always stories about being aware of your child being given cannabis for Halloween. It's one of the most ridiculous things that I can think of. Nobody's trying to give your kid their edibles. Trust me. Nobody is giving away their hard-earned money just to dose some kids on some edibles. It just doesn't happen. And more every year, stories come out about the issue being debunked. Media outlets becoming more and more smart about it. But still, when it comes down to it, it's something at this time of year dominates the cannabis news headlines. I just picked one of the many stories that have come out this past week on cannabis and Halloween and kids being dosed, all that craziness. This one's from New Jersey, from NBC. This is actually out of NBC Washington. That's funny. The website, nbscwashington.com. New Jersey is warning parents to look out for people slipping their kids marijuana-laced candy while trick-or-treating, but with no apparent evidence that's ever happened. Advocates for legalizing the drug say it's nothing more than a Halloween scare tactic, which I completely agree with. And I guess it's not too random that this story was picked out of all the other stories, and the reason why it comes from NBC, the Washington website, because it does look like New Jersey is hitting it pretty hard this year. So I guess we got to make that clear and say that really it's not ultimately crazy random. New Jersey just hitting it hard. The state attorney general office published a document being shared by law enforcement agencies around New Jersey and beyond, including a warning about a significant presence of marijuana candy and other edible forms in New Jersey and nearby states. The presence of these edible forms of marijuana poses a great risk to users, especially to children who may accidentally receive candy during Halloween, the warning says. The warning cites a case of a 10-year-old New York boy who police said became ill after eating candy infused with cannabis found in the backseat of his family's car, but that had nothing to do with Halloween. And I can understand parents being concerned about their kids possibly accidentally being dosed about cannabis. That's why it's important to keep the cannabis products inside of a child-safe bag, inside of some sort of child-proof container. It's also, even if you're not worried about your child getting into these things, and whatever scenario that you can think of that it would be absolutely fine, the responsible thing to do, and if authorities were to come into your place and try and question you about these things, pretty much anywhere in the United States, you're going to run into a situation where the authorities are going to ask you if these things are in a locked place, if they're in a place away from children. And that's just going to look good for you. I should rewind there. We're not trying to make it necessarily look good for you, because I can understand the other side. I can understand our side arguing and fighting for the right to have this treated just like a lot of other things, to not be persecuted and be jammed because of your choice to use cannabis in recreational form or medicinal form, however you feel about that. There shouldn't be people coming into your house and trying to take your children away solely based on those rules alone. So in order to, and I can understand wanting to fight that and present a front that you don't want to fold with this. I get it. But you have to also weigh the consequences, and you have to weigh what some of the damages could possibly be in the end. These authorities are wanting to see just a few things that really click with them on whether they feel you're an abusive person or not. You're not an abusive person. You're not a child. You're not someone who would put a child in endangered. I kept wanting to say child endangerment in that whole sentence, and it just wouldn't fit. You're not someone that does that. But here's the thing. The system works as you trying to prove that you're not. Not the other way around, how it should be with you're already a good person, prove that you're not. Weed makes you, I almost sound like some Trump there. You're not a good person. I'm not even, I got to work on my Trump, my Trump impression a little bit more. We all know that. We understand that. But we still have to play this stupid game with these authorities sometimes. So make sure that you protect yourself. Probably went off on that a little bit more than I should. But this time of year, it's definitely a heavy topic and something that's really pushed in the news. And it could be something that the authorities are kind of looking to prove. So don't become that example, and just make sure those things are locked away. If they are locked away, taken care of, your grow is behind a closed door. Make sure you always check the laws and the rules in your area. Here in Colorado, there's definitely been a lot of fights on that side of things for parents fighting for their rights with cannabis, and there's always independent examples of crazy things happening. But for the most part, if people have been responsible here, you are not growing an extreme amount more than you should. You don't, have weed just laying all around the house. You're not smoking weed right in front of your kids. We've generally been pretty okay here in Colorado. But thankfully, because of parents that have fought that and pushed back on that, it is a situation that we face right now that's not too crazy over the top, bursting through your doors, taking all the children. To some people, what I'm saying, it may be that to them, though. They may have had that happen. I've talked about this on JDR a long time ago when I was with Luann, and she had her kid, Lasan. Her kid was 3 years old. Jesus, slow down a little bit. Her kid was 3 years old when I got with Luann, and we were together for about 7 years. And during that time was during the time where I was kind of growing a lot, really helping at the beginning of the legalization movement here in Colorado. I had moved to Denver, was trying to work with as many organizations as possible. And, you know, besides all that, the growing and cannabis use, you know, you become somebody that people can, you know, do bad things to. If they're pissed at you, they can maybe call the authorities, or they can call child services. Or if you just draw attention to yourself online through something, or here's another thing that's really crazy too, or if the kid says something in school or to a parent or to an authority figure that they feel should be passed along. And a lot of people are not going to mess around when it comes to kids and being endangered. They're going to pass that on to the authorities and the next best person that they think can handle the situation and ask some questions. They maybe aren't trying to harm you or put you in a situation where your kids are taken away. They're just concerned, and they want to make sure that it is a situation that's maybe okay. And we have to, you know, you have to kind of approach it from a standpoint of like, okay, I understand this a little bit. We're going to stand our ground, but we're going to do things as responsible as possible. At one point in time, CPS, Child Protection Services, came to our house one day because of something Lasan had said in class. So they came in, they were asking 20 questions about cannabis, etc., trying to make sure that this was a good situation for the child to be in. They left leaving knowing that the child was in a good situation, was taken care of. And so it is something that I do understand a little bit, not to the point of where you had to fight anything, but it was a pain in the ass. It was something that lasted for, I can't remember exactly how long it lasted, but it was something that was a part of our life for a good amount of time, and it was a worry. And I can't imagine what it would be like to have your kid taken away just because of that. So it's frustrating. Got off completely. We didn't get off completely sidetracked on that. We're talking about cannabis and Halloween and making sure that the authorities don't get the one up on this and don't have any other stories to come out and attack with. All right, let's get back to this story, finish it off. Advocates say marijuana candy has seemingly become the new razor blade in the apple. Halloween urban myth, with police around the country sharing messages despite the lack of any known cases. Cannabis consumers are not looking to dose children with cannabis. That is not something that I've ever heard of anybody ever being interested or doing, said Evan Neeson, executive director of the New Jersey chapter of NORML, which is pushing to legalize marijuana. We all know that. This is just something that some police officers sometimes say every year, never really comes to fruition. It's just a scare tactic, he finishes up. And I get the other side wanting to use this as a scare tactic. We talked last week about the public safety issues and concerns and concerns that the soccer moms and the NASCAR dads have, and us trying to talk with them about it, argue that they're completely ridiculous, and it's very hard to do that. It's very hard to stand in front of people who are expressing a public health concern that's not too far-fetched and crazy. And marijuana, for a lot of people, for a large portion of this country and world, is still possibly a public health concern to them. And when you include children into that mix, there's no farking around with trying to argue with them or talk to them. So the only thing that can be at all wedged into their argument is leading by example and showing that these things absolutely do not happen, which they don't. It could be also another reason why I don't believe in conspiracy theories and things along the like, and I'm not trying to offend anybody over here. This is just a side note, but if there were really people out there that were trying to, maybe I shouldn't put this out there, but if I feel like if this, became a real big issue, let's put it this way, if this was ever an issue, it would be the other side trying to plant evidence on us. That there would be some dastardly villain trying to fark up everything by coming in to the situation and just introducing this problem. Giving out marijuana edibles to kids, going and spending $1,000 at the dispensary or putting $1,000 worth of weed into edibles and then handing those out to kids. That's just a little bit crazy. Being funny here, if my child came home with a couple Incredibles bars, I'd be pretty stoked because I'd be checking my child's candy when they got home, making sure that everything in there, was kosher and there was nothing that was opened, or you still got to do those things. It's definitely interesting how that parent gene starts to kick in whenever there's kids involved in your life, though. So just playing the art of war here and understanding the other side's fight. Cannabis-infused candy can take the form of gummy bears or can be made to look like fruit-flavored hard candy or chocolate bars. The state of Colorado and other places has also introduced rules to make sure that these type of things don't happen, and that there are rules against, making candy bar or a gummy bear, I should say, edibles and selling those. So there are rules that have put in place by states to prevent these types of situations from even accidentally happening. And that's where the real fear is, like I mentioned before, is accidentally having a child run across, your supply and them not being old enough to maybe understand what it is, or maybe they are old enough to understand what it is and then get in your stash. I feel like if they were old enough to understand what it is and still got in your stash, that there wouldn't be so much as a problem if it was like, oh shit, I don't know what I ate. I got into something in your closet. I'm feeling really farked up, man. And then that's kind of snowballs from there. Those are the scary situations. Democrat frontrunner in New Jersey's November 7th governor race supports full marijuana legalization in the state, I should add, which could happen as soon as next year if he's elected and the Democratic-controlled legislature passes it. His Republican challenger opposes marijuana legalization. New Jersey already has medical marijuana. So I remind you, don't give away your edibles to the kids, ladies and gentlemen.
The John Doe Radio Show.
Sex and cannabis made it into the headlines this week. This story from Forbes.com. I told you, Forbes. On top of it all, a new study published today in the Journal of Sexual Medicine reports that people who smoke more pot also have more sex. It's not exactly clear why this was the case. Maybe they're just a little bit more chill of people and like to have a little bit more fun. The question is, what does this connection actually tell us? One answer may be that far from impairing sexual function, as some studies have found, it may actually boost it. The team from Stanford University School of Medicine looked at data from the National Survey of Family Growth Study. Such a weird name for us. The National Survey of Family Growth Study. A long-term study carried out by the CDC. The participants, numbering at about 50,000, were men and women who averaged a little over 29 years old. The researchers were particularly interested in two questions. Now, please think about the past 4 weeks. How many times have you had sexual intercourse with a woman or a man in the past 4 weeks? The study didn't take into account homosexual encounters. So when I say man or woman, they were asking if it was actually the opposite sex. And during the past 12 months, how often have you smoked marijuana? That correlated pot smoking and sexual encounters every year since 2002. And like every person remembers every sexual encounter that they ever got into. Holy sheets balls. I mean, I wish I could say I remember what happened right before. I'm just going to shut up and move on. And there was indeed... God, digging a hole so big for yourself with just saying that. Period, end of story. I just hear the backhoe digging right now. I was burying myself into it. It's okay. There was indeed a dose-dependent relationship where the more pot a person smoked, the more sex they had. Those who smoked pot every day had about 20% more sex than non-smokers. For example, women who didn't report smoking any pot in the last year had sex 6 times on average over the previous 4 weeks, compared with just over 7 times for women who had it daily. So, you get 1 extra session in. That's well worth it. Plus, you get to smoke weed. Men who used it daily had sex on average almost 7 times over the previous 4 weeks, compared with 5.6 times in non-users. So, you got about 5.5 times. I mean... men and women both understand that half, okay? We don't have to explain the 5.5 because you understand it. Just kidding, but I'm not really. The data was adjusted for potential confounding variables like alcohol and cocaine use. There was also still significant, and were still significant across race, ethnicity, age, income, marital status, and education. The obvious questions is why the connection exists. The researchers say the causation can't be... froze on that word. Did you hear that? The causation can't be assumed since this is just a correlation, but they also point to several reasons thinking it may be causal. For instance, an earlier study found that in rats who were given cannabinoids, the active compound in marijuana, they kind of wrote that weird. When they were given a cannabinoid and then don't list the I guess it's THC is what they're saying here, mating behavior increased in 50% of the animals. And in the human brain, cannabinoid receptors are found in areas that are active during sex. Further, an area of the brain whose activity is linked to coital frequency also lit up when people used marijuana, then were shown erotic images. Yeah, giggity. How do I get to be a part of this study? That's all I want to know. It's like, period, end of story. Why I'm reading this study to you guys is that hopefully someone out there has a connection with these people, is listening to the show, and can maybe slide me a gimme. You know what I'm saying? Just hook me up with being a part of that study, or just a cannabis study in general. There was a weird study a weird story that came out here recently about, maybe I'll try and jump to that here later in the show and pull that up. If I don't get to it now, we'll try and get to it later. But if you want to search for it, they're looking for participants for a cannabis study here in Colorado. I think it's CSU that's doing it, and they haven't got enough people to be a part of it. I think you actually get paid to be a part of this study, too. You're like, dude, why the hell are you mentioning this without giving me a link to go and get it? Takes a little work. You got to work to get your money. If I had it, I would give it to you. You know what's interesting is before I've read stories about, and I've talked with doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, who talk about cannabis being a situation that in some people is something that can trigger that little happy place that gets you, going or whatever. And I don't know if it's skewed results or skewed examples, but a lot of talk also about how it kind of throws things off and it derails that drive and it doesn't contribute to a better sex life. The first thing that I think of when I think about that is the anti-drug warriors coming into play with that it's just rhetoric and bullshit being spewed by the other side in one of the most important parts of people's life. Sex is a pretty damn important part of some people's lives. If they're not having that, then they're just not happy. If they're not having it with a good sex with their partner, then it's just not something that they want to continue on in a relationship with. I get it. Maybe we'll have to have like some sex specialist on the show here soon and talk about examples of no, this just seems like it could get out of hand and just make me feel entirely uncomfortable. My first thought would be, I wish we still had the awesome Jenny Cush with us, and we could invite her to come on and mix things up with us. So I do miss her a ton, and that was for sure the first thing that came to my mind. Back to the article. That said, some studies have found a correlation between heavy pot use and erectile dysfunction, but the new research, along with studies mentioned above, hint that it may be helpful in treating at least some forms of sexual dysfunction, or at the very least, that it doesn't necessarily hurt sexual function at all. With the growing wave of legalizing marijuana in the U.S., it's important to understand the health effects, say study author Mike Eisenberg. As an expert in male sexual and reproductive function, my patients often ask me how marijuana may impact sexual function. This study begins to provide answers. It could also be that there's separate variables at play, which makes a person more likely to both smoke pot and to be more sexually active, but more work is needed to be done, and understanding how exactly the connection works. A randomized clinical trial would be good if difficult to get approval for, but it would surely have many people volunteering to participate, as evidenced by my excitement to be a part of it too. So this, like I said, this story coming from Ford's Gady, it's not necessarily the most scientific study being done. It's something that I critique other studies on, and that's cherry picking stats for things here and there and just having a statistical based study. It's not 100% correct. You shouldn't look at these studies as it being like that's the rule. That's how it is. And a lot of the time, the drug warriors push off these studies and these cherry-picked numbers as being fact and reality and run with them. So we'll see what happens. I mean, it's definitely, I think we can all say from personal experience, at least I would hope from your personal experience, that cannabis adds a little bit of fun to your life. You know what I'm saying? I know it's something I like to do before we get jiggy with it. Go take a dab, smoke a bowl, something like that. It makes things a lot better. Maybe not a lot better, but it does make things more enjoyable. As I was saying that, a lot better, I was thinking of like, man, how bad is the sex that you're getting to where it's a lot better when you smoke weed? I think back to the movie Half Baked, and the dude's like, where the dude from America's Funniest Home Videos, Bob Saget, and he's like, you ever done this on weed? So I can think of through half of this story. The other half, well, we'll just not go there.
It's the John Doe Radio Show.
I ran across an interesting read this week at businessinsider.com. It talks about how the weed of today not being the weed that your parents smoked. That's been a huge argument that's come across for years and years now, talking about how weed is like 5, 10, 20 times more potent than the weed that we had before. And that's not necessarily 100% true across the board. The tests that were done on a lot of those, the numbers that were used in many instances that they're talking about were incredibly low numbers. We're talking about ditch weed, horrible, horrible, horrible weed. So that skewed that alone. This article from businessinsider.com gets into it also. Now, not everything in this article do I believe is rule of thumb. For instance, they kind of start off saying how there's not much study been done on weed and the health effects of cannabis in your body. Well, it's not entirely true and pushes the the ONDCB, the Office of National Drug Control Policy's view forward just a little bit. I mean, everybody on the American side of things, the American government side of things, and I should say more specifically, the anti-weed people, the anti-drug people, DARE, things like that. You have to remember that their job is not to look at the facts. Their job is not to say, okay, we see that, we're going to fix what we're saying now. Their job is to prevent children and to prevent you from using any type of drug whatsoever. Period. End of story. So that's why you never see them come to the table and say, I agree with you on this. These studies, wow, brand new information. Thank you for giving me this info. It completely changes my mind on what we're looking at here. No, that doesn't happen. It's because that's not their job. They're not responsible for doing that. They're responsible for exactly the opposite, on telling you that what you're reading is bullshit. This article, 1 in 5 Americans lives in states where marijuana is legal to use. Yet we know surprisingly little about the drug's effects on our health. As I just said, that's not necessarily true. Rumors abound while science is sparse. No, it's just that we don't agree. The American government and studies are not allowed to be done here in the U.S., so therefore, they don't recognize them. You think the United States is the only place where studies have been done on cannabis? Give me a break. You cannot have, and I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about the other side, cannot have a view of not leaking outside their neighborhood, of saying that this study can't be recognized because it didn't come from us. I don't even know what the right word is for that, but it's such a limiting and dumb way to look at things. It's such an ignorant way to approach a problem. Dispensaries in some states are routinely selling flower that's at least 5 times, scrolled up way too fast there, at least 5 times as strong as what it was 40 years ago, says Christian Hopfer, a professor of psychiatry at the University of Colorado at Boulder Anschutz Medical Campus, and one of the lead researchers on a forthcoming $5.5 million study of cannabis. Hopfer's study will be the largest and most long-term analysis of cannabis to date. Hopfer's research has taken him to dispensaries around the state of Colorado where he said he's seen a variety of marijuana sold with a content breakdown of around 25%, the active ingredient in marijuana that's responsible for the high. 25% THC. I missed the THC there. That's what they're usually talking about. But as we become more and more knowledgeable on the testing part of this process, we're going to start to break down those percentages more into different cannabinoids and more helpful medicines, more helpful, why can't I think of the word right now, more helpful ratios of those cannabinoids. Maybe 5 to 1 helps with this and 51 whatever helps with this. That's what's exciting to watch here in the future. And it's going to take, our government, places like Colorado, which allowed for this study to be happen and actually is giving a lot of cannabis money that we've made here in Colorado to this study to make it happen. Things like this are what's needed, because then we can finally get this other side to shut the fuck up about not having any legitimate studies. There are thousands of studies out there when it comes to cannabis. I shouldn't say thousands. There's over 1,000 studies out there when it comes to cannabis that are legitimately recognized. The THC content of marijuana across the U.S. has tripled since 1995, according to a large recent study. For the study, researchers at the University of Mississippi reviewed close to 39,000 samples of cannabis that had been seized across the country by the DEA. While THC levels hovered around 4% on average, in 1995 they skyrocketed to roughly 12% in 2014. Doesn't that make a little bit of sense to you? And here's the other thing, too. With DEA seizures and drug, not even just the DEA, but drug agencies in places like California and Texas, Missouri, Kansas, they're also chopping down feral weed. They're going out, chopping down hemp that grows wild, whether it be from World War II or that's just nobody's noticed. Who knows where the hell it's from? Somebody's not out there planting hemp in a ditch to grow it for weed. It's just randomly there. Maybe somebody threw seeds out. Who fucking knows? Nobody's intentionally trying to grow these plants. The majority of what is seized in the United States is that shit. So to be able to talk about percentages and what the average is, we can't even get down to a legitimate discussion. Can't even have an educated discussion because of the stupid drug war and the other side pushing off these ridiculous numbers. It makes no sense at all. It's so frustrating. It makes sense for them because just as we talked about, those drug offices, the DEA, the Office of National Drug Control, their job is to lie to you, is to bring you the most ridiculous facts and try and sell them as being, anti-drug. This is why you got to do this. We can't have marijuana. Look how much it's increased. And then a lot of these seizures, they've started doing a little bit better on the numbers. And people are starting to grow better weed. I mean, as we become better with legalizing cannabis, these people are going to get better at pinpointing the numbers and twisting the numbers and making them seem like it's something crazy that's going on when it's not. Meanwhile, the CBD content in marijuana, the part that's responsible for many of the drug's therapeutic effects, and that's not even necessarily true either. That is the perceived notion at this point. And the more you do get into it and the more you talk to people that know about these things, it's not just the one cannabinoid that's doing the help or it's the entourage effect. It's multiple cannabinoids together at different ratios affecting you. And if we want to talk about what can help people, what some of the biggest basis for trying to go after these studies are for, is for the children. If you want to talk about the children, throw the children in the mix all the time. When it comes to seizures and epilepsy and things like that, these studies are the studies that need to be done because miracle medicines, some parents are saying, miracle medicines are being created with this. So why are we not helping push it further down the road? It's not hurting anybody. And the only reason that the only thing that you can say, the only people saying that it is hurting people are those drug warriors. The other side saying, no, this is horrible. It's causing so much damage to the. Where is the damage? Where? You haven't proved it yet. Tracking THC potency over time can be tricky. The older a weed sample gets, that's why, getting back to this, I know I'm getting multiple times off the topic of this story, but just like the Halloween cannabis story, that you keep crying wolf time after time after time again, these stories are going to start to lose steam. And I think a lot of people, when it comes to cannabis across the nation, are tired of being lied to. They see that it's not a bad thing. They see that it's helping their grandma or their grandpa, or that grandma or that grandpa who thought that it was this horrible drug, used it, and it now helps them. It's not this crazy. I thought this was heroin. I thought this was crack. That's not what this is. This actually helps me, makes me feel good. Once those studies and those, I shouldn't even say studies, once those testimonials and those independent experiences start to come out more and more, the internet helping do that, that's when we gain more and more ground, and that's what's happening here. The older a weed sample gets, the more THC appears to degrade. How it's stored matters too. There's two barriers that could interfere somewhat with the metrics on pot's potency. So when it comes down to testing, the government, that's also plays a part into it too. And then if we want to get weed to be studied, it can't be necessarily sitting around in a back warehouse for a year and a half and then, okay, we're going to study that just because it's the supply we had. And then think that, that's the product that people are smoking, or that's the numbers that you should run off of. That makes zero bit of sense. Why is it when it comes to marijuana, all these scientists, these politicians, and people just become stupid? They forget scientific reasoning. They forget the procedure of going through these things, of testing out a hypothesis. God, it's so freaking ridiculous and frustrating. A 2012 review of 17 studies analyzing marijuana potency, for example, noted that most of the studies they reviewed did not describe relevant information about the features. For example, conservation status, the age of the sample, all those little details of the analyzed cannabis samples. Nevertheless, most researchers agree that weed appears to be getting progressively stronger. That's because we're becoming better at what we're doing, and people are feeling more and more free to be able to, work on their cannabis plants, to work on these medicines or, whatever product. Although there differs in opinion how much precisely it's gotten stronger. There's another issue at play here. While researchers might be able to conclude that weed is getting stronger, they can't necessarily say whether or not people are increasing their doses or by how much. So maybe it is getting stronger, but maybe you're only smoking a dab, or you're only smoking half that joint as opposed to like 10 joints. If that's the 4% weed that we're talking about that your parents smoke. I mean, I do believe that there was super shitty weed, and there was a lot of people that didn't know what the hell they were doing when it came to growing weed. It makes sense that people just didn't have access to the information that will produce a quality product. And just, I know, for example, because I have people in my family, people I know very close, that have a hard time, even to this day, paying attention to the information that's in front of them to growing a good product or getting a good product. And you see it. You see the results of it. It's like you tell someone something or you direct them in a certain direction. You know what the result should be. They didn't get that result, and they didn't listen to you. When it comes to weed growers, that's like the number one most frustrating thing, is talking with the other weed growers about being set in their ways, especially the older ones. Oh shit, we won't even get into that. Where were we at here? A 2014 study published in the journal Addiction, for example, found that regular weed users naturally adjust their consumption somewhat based on potency. It makes perfect freaking sense. Inhaling less smoke when the marijuana is higher in THC. Despite taking smaller inhales, however, those users still took in a higher THC dose. We're talking about concentrated dose, so does that have an effect? Is that a difference than taking it slowly in? Giggity. Sorry. A more important predictor for addiction, though, they concluded, was people's individual smoking behavior, like how many puffs they took, how much smoke they inhaled, and how long their puffs lasted. First of all, if we're talking about addiction here when it comes to cannabis, that's a pretty ridiculous thing to put in the mix with opioids and other things. I mean, we have to be realistic if we want to try and fix this opioid epidemic. We cannot continue to lie that one drug, marijuana, is just as bad or worse than another drug, opioids, And we have to be honest with the fact that marijuana is a relatively harmless substance. Open up studies, prove to me that it's not. Prove to me that it's not. When we start talking about these things, addiction and severe problems, the gateway theory, that's when you irresponsibly continue to tie this drug in with other seriously harmful drugs, meth and opioids. You know, Jeff Sessions, we'll talk about the story here in a minute, talking about how opioid use is caused by people smoking marijuana. What the fuck what are you talking about? Opioid use is caused by manufacturers and drug companies, doctors overprescribing pills to this point. That's the problem we've got ourselves into. Regardless of what the opioid problem was before this and heroin or whatever, we're now in a situation to where prescription drug companies and doctors and people, you have to take responsibility for yourself, have created this problem with drug abuse and an opioid epidemic. Let's just be honest about it. We continue to lie and bullshit each other. We're never going to get the problem solved. And you're going to have people like Jeff Sessions that are continue to be lawmakers and spew this just absolutely ridiculous and, for lack of a better term, just hateful rhetoric. It's insane. How many times are we going to say insane today? I think that the Smoker's Game of the Day for JDR, Smoker's Game of the Week, should be whenever I say, it's insane, it's insane, you have to take a dab or a puff. All right? On top of the farts and the shiz. Back to where we were at. Despite taking smaller inhales, how much the puff lasted. In this setting, a new approach to addressing cannabis and its dosage is desperately needed, says the author of this study. I think we've dealt with marijuana historically from a criminal justice perspective, but if you switch to an environment where it's legal, you switch to a public health perspective, and to do that right, we need more scientific research. And I 100% agree. It's what we talked about the last 15 minutes we've been talking about this story. So whenever you also hear that argument about your parents' weed being a lot more stronger, it just depends on where your parents got their supply from. Let's move on.
It's the John Doe Radio Show.
A possible federal crackdown has been a concern ever since Donald Trump got into office. Jeff Sessions, being the Attorney General, he's a longtime opponent of marijuana legalization. There's a study that was just released, and I'll mention it here at the, I think the article actually mentions it here. Like 64% of Americans are in favor of cannabis legalization. That's a crazy high number, and politicians are starting to understand that it is not a good idea for them to go after cannabis users. This article from Forbes.com, the latest update on possible federal crackdowns, or at least Jeff Sessions' view on things. U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said in an interview on Tuesday, "I can't comment on the existence of an investigation at this time," adding that he doesn't think changing state laws have taken away from the Department of Justice's power to enforce the ongoing federal ban. He said, "I do not believe there is any argument that because a state legalizes marijuana, that the federal law against marijuana no longer exists. I do believe that federal law clearly is clear in all 50 states, and we will do our best to enforce the laws we are required to do so." Sessions was responding to a suggestion from a conservative radio host, Hugh Hewitt, about using federal racketeering laws to go after marijuana businesses. "A lot of states are just simply breaking the law," Hewitt argued. "A lot of money is being made and banked. One RICO prosecution of one producer, and the banks that service them would shut this all down. Is that prosecution going to happen?" is what this guy asked. Besides this guy being a total asshole, fucking radio host, I mean, that's just, you have to make sure that you put a marker there, and that there are people like that out there that want to end you. They just want to end you. If not in a monetary way, they literally would like to end you. And that's the sad, scary part. And that's what's scary about this whole federal crackdown, or if there's not going to be a federal crackdown situation, is that the federal government, Jeff Sessions, hasn't said. There's nothing clear that's out there. And there's one line of thinking that would say that since they haven't done anything to this point, that they might not be doing anything. That someone may have gotten to him and said that this would be a horrible idea if you were to push this around. We'll see what happens. I mean, this is one of those situations that could be instantaneously scary if something were to happen. And the radio host pointed it out. But I don't think it would be as simple as what he said, that everything would just end. There would be such a massive fight that it would be probably the worst thing that they could do. That 64% of America that wants legalization to happen, that people will wake up if you shut down states like Colorado from what they're doing, I truly believe that 64% of Americans that believe legalization should happen, marijuana should be legalized. I kind of think that they would wake up, that it would become a topic, or maybe I'm just being naive. I don't know. I hope that they would wake up and it would become a larger issue. The amount of money lost. It's definitely the state's responsibility and rule and law that the state of Colorado defend what it's done. He also added, I don't know that one prosecution would be quite as effective as that, he said. Exactly what I just said. We will analyze all those cases, and I can't comment on the existence of an investigation at this time. I hear you. You're making a suggestion. I hear you. You're lobbying. And see, one of the important things to point out in that sense of what he says is repeating what I kind of just said. I don't know that one prosecution would be quite as effective as that. That it may unleash a sleeping giant. That we may fark up and go the opposite direction that we are trying to go. I mean, I've got to think that they understand that that's got to be a tactic that they play with. That they could possibly do more harm than good by tightening the noose on this. In a separate appearance on the Heritage Foundation on Thursday, Sessions elaborated on his disdain for society's shifting attitudes towards marijuana and other drugs. He said, we've got to reestablish first a view that you should say no. People should say no to drug use, he said. This whole country needs to not be so lackadaisical about drugs. Much of the addiction starts with marijuana. It's not a harmless drug. I think we already have established. So I don't know how we can reestablish that you should just say no. I think we've already established that some drugs are bad and that you shouldn't, my rules of life. Don't get yourself a felony. Don't get yourself addicted to drugs. That includes meth, heroin, alcohol. Shit that can actually ruin your life. Things that will cause you to derail completely because of the drug. There's a line of thinking, and I can play along with this and possibly work with you in this argument, but I'm not gonna draw the argument straight back to cannabis being a problem. That weed is a problem in some people's lives, just as many, many other things can be a problem in somebody's life. If you don't have control over what you're doing, it's a problem. But is that necessarily the and I don't even want to call it a drug in this situation, but it is. Does this particular drug, marijuana, cause you to go out of your way to do that ridiculous behavior? Or is it just something else underlying that's causing these issues to happen that is being maybe masked or looked at, that marijuana is being looked at because of that issue? And that's one of the scary things that we have to really pay attention to. I think when it comes to our healthcare as a whole in the United States is, number one, accepting that drug use in a large portion of people, in everybody, that drug use is a health issue and a drug addiction should be treated as a health issue. It certainly doesn't work, and I understand the line of thinking of throwing somebody away and locking them away and never letting them out. I get the other side's thinking on that. And if it were working, it would be a completely different argument. If it weren't destroying people's lives and causing a drain on society more than what the good they say that it's doing, I wouldn't have a problem admitting that to you. But that's not what's happening. That is not what we're looking at. That's not what we're facing. We're facing a problem that just keeps growing and doesn't need to be reestablished. The Just Say No campaign does not need to be reestablished. We need a campaign of education, a campaign of scientific research and study and admitting that we're human. And the number one thing that humans like to do is get out of their own headspace. It's since the beginning, the dawn of time, humans have wanted to try and trip on something. It's just how it is, and we have to admit that. We've come to that conclusion with alcohol in most cases. Any argument that you want to throw against alcohol is just not going to fly. It's ingrained in our society so much that's not. When we first started talking about legalization here in Colorado, and we started the SAFER campaign, marijuana was safer than alcohol. One of the biggest arguments that came up from the other side was that, why are you trying to stop people from using alcohol? And it's like, that has nothing to do with this. That has not a bit to do with this. Number one, I wish we could possibly look at that and limiting that a little bit more, not for the sake of limiting it, but just for the sake of being honest with each other and being honest when it comes to health and education and fixing the actual problems that we have in this country when it comes to drug abuse and health care, putting the money in the right place where it belongs, doing away with the drug war, trillions of dollars from that, putting that towards education, rehab facilities, new health facilities, new ways that we do things. And that's just working within the healthcare system that we have today. That's not even talking about changing the healthcare system that they're talking about changing, Obamacare or socialist healthcare, whatever it is. These are just simple things that we should be doing and understanding as people to help each other out. So, I forgot what the final thing I was going to say in that rant. Ultimately, what I'm trying to get at is that the Just Say No campaign creates more harm than it does good. And when we're working with people who are as old as dirt, and I'm not trying to be offensive, we're working with people that are old as dirt and hanging on to education that has seemed like ages ago, how we've come so far in so many things, how we can just hold on to that mindset and allow some of these people, older people usually, to make these decisions, it boggles, it doesn't really boggle my brain. It boggles me that they could be in office for so long and do make these decisions for so long. People aren't just looking at marijuana when it comes to voting for somebody at the booth. You know, I understand completely that that's a very, very, very minor thing that the majority of the American public is voting on when they go to vote for somebody for president. I get it. I understand it. But the point being, why are we ultimately not looking at all the other outdated bullshit that they have coming into play? Anyway, we stop that whole rant right there. Term limits, that's something that needs to be looked at, and I think would change quite a bit. But then when you get into the argument about term limits, you talk about how if you don't change the money and the way the money pays for things, that no matter what the money says, the people are going to say, whoever gets in there every however many years, if there's lobbying and they don't have the money fixed, that's what's going to control it. So both those things, by the way, are biggest problems here in America. That's what we face in America when we're trying to get things done on a national level. It's the money and establishment politics, people that have career politicians that have been there forever. While Senator Sessions was one of Congress' most vocal opponents to cannabis law reform, during one hearing, for example, he said good people don't smoke marijuana. Rest in peace, Mickey Martin. He also spoke out against legalization last month by saying, "I've never felt that we should legalize marijuana." He said, "It doesn't strike me that the country would be better if it's being sold on every street corner." This makes it look so horrible, and that he's bringing his opinion and his perspective just so heavy into this. Not even looking at reality, just this is my opinion. You know, and I want to say that he sounds like my grandpa on this. But even my grandpa's changed his mindset when it comes to weed, and even talked to me, had discussions about it, and opened up. Holy guacamole! All right. He said we're reviewing the policy that allows states to proceed without much federal interference. He says we haven't changed it, but we're reviewing it. We're looking at states that have legalized or decriminalized marijuana and trying to evaluate what the impact is. But last week, Sessions indicated in appearances before the Senate Judiciary Committee that he is open to at least allowing more marijuana cultivation for research purposes. He said during that session, "I think it would be healthy to have some more competition in supply," he said in response to a question from Senator Orrin Hatch, who has in recent weeks become a leading congressional champion for medical cannabis. Another thing that tells me is that points us in the direction that he understands completely what's going on in the U.S. He understands the barometer, publicly saying one thing, and then even though this is public, it's still, you're on oath, there's senators asking you questions. He's not just talking to the media and running an drug dare campaign here. I have to believe that some of the positive things that he said means that he's just wants to be a little bit hands off with it, but still cares about that NASCAR dad and the soccer mom and their views and public health, as we've talked extensively about here on the JDR. As I mentioned, Gallup poll just released on Wednesday, 64% of Americans support legalizing marijuana. For the first time in the firm's 48 years of polling on cannabis, that's the Gallup poll, a majority of Republicans are on board with ending prohibition. Boom.
It's the John Doe Radio Show.
That's going to bring this week's show to a close. If you're interested in sponsorship with us on the John Doe Radio Show, email me, johndoe@johndoeradio.com. I hope you have a fantastic week. If you have any suggestions or you would like to talk to me, hit me up on Facebook page under Tim Martin, or visit the John Doe Radio Show Facebook page. We'll have giveaways and other awesome stuff for you coming very, very soon. I'm going to have a ton of interviews here on the John Doe Radio Show. Just need to finalize some equipment and make sure that's all put together and going, and we'll bring that out for you guys. Have a fantastic week. Until we meet again next time, I'm John Doe. See ya.
It's the John Doe Radio Show.